Good afternoon. Welcome to our EOP-012-3 R8 Periodic Data Submittal webinar. We're glad to have you with us. I have a couple announcements to get us started. First, we'd like to invite you to our electromagnetic transient strategic workshop. This will be on November 19th and 20th in person at WEC's offices. And it is to bring together our stakeholders to discuss EMT modeling and its role in integrating and assessing IBRs. That registration is still open, and we will drop the link for that in the chat for you. Also that same week will be our Reliability and Security Oversight Update, which we hold on the third Thursday of each month to bring you our Reliability and Security Oversight Update and interesting topics for you. We would hope to see you there. You do not need to register for that one. You'll just access it through our calendar. And lastly, we do also want to announce a NERC self-report and mitigation training that will be held virtually December 8th through 11th. Registration is now open for this. It is what was once called WEC Enforcement Fundamentals. So if you missed out on that previously and you would like to take it or have a colleague that would be interested, we'd love to have you join us for this virtual offering of this course. Our antitrust policy is that all WEC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WEC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in open session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WEC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WEC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact WEC's legal counsel. That's it for me, so we will now turn the time over to Curtis Cruz.
Thank you, Maylee. Appreciate that. And it's very important to capture all those other aspects that are going on here at WEC. There's a lot of other efforts out there. But today, of course, we want to talk a little bit about EOP-012-3 R8, and that is the generator cold weather constraint declarations and how that is managed. A little bit of that background when Project 2024 was undergoing changes. There is the development of a process, and it is currently located on the PDS submittal schedule out there on the NERC website. I know we provided it in the past. I may try to provide it again before this is over with, but it gives an outline of what we're expecting in terms of constraints and or cap extension requests. Now today we're going to stick to constraints, and I want to give you a couple important dates on the next slide. And the first one is, of course, the implementation plan called out for constraints that had been evaluated, declared under EOP-12-2. If they met attachment 1 of EOP-12-3, are to be submitted to us 45 calendar days within that 45 calendar days after the effective date of EOP-12-3. That is November 14th. So we're a week away basically from submittal. I will tell you we've got only about 10 submittals covering literally only about 10 plants at this point. And to me, it's a little underwhelming to a large degree. I know we were just in some conversations with a company that probably has about 40 of the constraints or 40 units that may have to have constraints submitted. So we want to make sure that we don't wait until the last minute to submit. I know it seems like the last minute and probably the last minute for some of this training to some of you. But do your best. If this helps you submit, try to submit as soon as you can. We've got a group of people here, including myself, that will be reviewing these internally to WEC. We also have what's called a cold weather task force that me and auditor Tyler Whiting, I believe is how you say his last name, are members of for the ERO enterprise. And we're evaluating whether consistency is occurring across the ERO enterprise. We're there to support other regions when they have issues come in that don't quite make sense or may need some additional support. So there is some groups working behind the scenes on that. I know if you're a member of NAGF, I think they've proposed a meeting for tomorrow to have some discussions about some things. So we're going to be having some discussions with them. And I always invite people, me personally, if you have some questions that you want to talk to me about, don't hesitate to reach out. I will certainly try to accommodate your schedule and my schedule and get information out to you as quickly as possible. But November 14th is coming up. Now, the ERO portal is undergoing maintenance according to NERC, November 7th through Monday, November 10th. I have been told that does not affect your access to Align or the SEL. And I think that URLs for those should continue to work, but just be aware of that. Let's go to that next slide, please. If you think about this particular PDS is what we call it, an event initiated by the entity. Entity has to go through the Align portal to initiate it. I'm going to give you some basic steps in how to do that because a lot of you may have not done this in the past. But if you look, when you go into Align and you select periodic data submittals, this will be your platform. Now, I will tell you, these pictures are from a test environment. So when they were taken, the EOP-12 was not in here yet. Parts of it was, but not all of it. And when I say parts of it, if you look at standard and requirement there, you should see an EOP-012-3 R8 in your current Align portal. If you go out there and look in Align, you should be able to see that. But that is how you go through and start to create. You go to this section and you hit the plus sign. And when you hit the plus sign, you come up with the next slide. And I'm glad I don't have to say next slide necessarily, but I'll try to incorporate that just for whoever's turning the slides in my conversation here. But as you look at that, when you select that plus sign, this comes up. And there's a couple things that are important and highlighted in green here. That PDS name is something you get to call out. And what I encourage you to do is, if it's site specific, put the site name in there in some respects. This is for your tracking. There's no defined way to create those PDS names. It is free form. Make it relevant to your organization. The monitoring period start is the day you actually create this. That's all that is. The monitoring period end is not required whatsoever. It can be blank. You can put, I've seen people put the 336 calendar months date in there as something for them, but it means nothing to the submittal. You can submit without it. The description, brief is better. Keep it high level. In the Excel form submitted to the SEL, there's going to be a brief narrative cell as well, and additional information you may have in that documentation that's submitted to the SEL. So here's an example right here. And forgive me, I put the 12-3 and a R8 in there. It doesn't look pretty, but here again, it wasn't available to me at that point. Notice the PDS name. They put constraint for corn unit 1, the date they selected, and then they indicated what was happening there. And they kept it real brief. They provided some information about what might be in the SEL, document names. That's not necessary. Just give that high level description of what is causing you to submit this. And I think that's important. There is one known issue. I can't always read the description fully. I know within a line, it kind of clips it off a tad. And that's another reason to keep it brief. I think I could do a report and pull that information out in some respects, but it's not real helpful if I have to do that on every one of these. So please be thinking about that. Now, once you've done that, you go to the next slide. And what happens is you've updated that initial description. This will show up down here. This is your view, my self-created periodic data request. I know nothing as a region as to how many you might have here. So don't think you're finished if you get to this point. You're not. You've got to make sure that you complete the process for me or any other CA to evaluate the constraints. So just be real aware of that opportunity there. You're not quite finished. What you have to do is select that unique ID, which will then bring you to the next slide. Now, this is one that's critically important as well. It gives the basic, it establishes the ID number up there at the top. You'll see that. It has all the different types. Everything comes across. Your description comes across. Here again, that's why that description is important to be brief, because I think that was a pretty brief one. If I added another sentence, you may not be able to read it, or I may not be able to read it. There are some instructions here. You need to make sure you follow those instructions. It's important. Just because you're here doesn't mean you've submitted anything. Again, I don't see it yet. You have to assign this PDS to somebody. And generally that's defaulted to the PCC or somebody of your selection. I don't have any control over that, but you have to click it to assign it, and that will get you to the next slide here. Through the assignment process, you see you have to pick a person's name. Now in the test system, it's assignee. And then you have to action it. You have to say assign. If you don't assign it, I'll never see it. You'll never be able to complete it, right? And for folks that have used PDS for different things, they're used to it. But event-driven PDSs there's a limited subset of those. PRC2 is one that comes up more often than not. EOP-8 has some, but EOP-12 is how this is being utilized. So assign an individual to answer those questions. And honestly, I'd have to ask Angie Shapiro on how you could change people's names in there. I really don't know off the top of my head, but if you want somebody else, you need to work through that thought process, probably with Angie on that. So after you have signed it, we go to the next. And this is the next slide. And this is what it looks like. Again, pretty standard, but now you've got assigned to X. Now it says assigned to you here, but it will have a person's name right there. It's critically important, still not done. You got to click here to move forward. Where it says click here to answer, that's a link. And that link is important because it has another interface that we're going to see on the next slide that needs completed. So if we go to the next slide, after clicking here, you've got a set of questions, and they are conditional questions to a large degree. This is what the base interface looks like. What type of constraint is being submitted? Why is that important? Well, it's important. There are known constraints and there are case-by-case constraints, and due to the process that was developed, we have certain timeframes as the CEA to review those types of constraints. I think 10 days for known, and I think 45 for case by case. So it's important that you capture that and capture that as correctly as you can. Now, if you make a mistake there, we can work with you on that, but understand that it makes a distinction on how we're going to be tracking these. We want that out there so we can track how many known constraints we have, how many case-by-case constraints we have across the ERO enterprise. Now, what base requirement? If you think about EOP-12, there are several of those requirements that talk about constraints. Being able to be called out, each one of those is in the drop-down menu. So you need to make sure that you capture the correct requirement for the constraint. And I know there's one thing that is out there that people are talking about, a preemptive declaration of a generator cold weather constraint, i.e. you own a wind plant, you know it's susceptible to icing. Should I submit something? Let me tell you, I don't think it's in your best interest, and this is being discussed at the ERO enterprise, but it's not in your best interest to say that's an R3 constraint. R3 was meant for generally the thought process that you couldn't operate down to your ECWT in normal operations. That is one of those thoughts. And here's a case where maybe your wind plant is, the design temperature is -20 and you're sitting in an ECWT area that has -30. Well, that's a great opportunity to call out R3 because you can't get to that operational ECWT because of where you're at in that ECWT. So be thinking about that. R6 is important to understand because you have to have suffered a generator cold weather reliability event or be a similar unit in similar conditions to a unit that had suffered a generator cold weather reliability event. Now we know that the current events that you may be submitting to us occurred last year, possibly even the year before, depending on how you manage your constraints. We understand that you're not going to necessarily meet the timelines associated with submittal because of that, but that's allowed for the implementation plan, as long as you hit that 45 days and have an understanding of what's happening there. So be real critical in looking at that. Is this submittal an update addition to a previously approved generator cold weather constraint? That's allowed for sure. That's another conditional question that may be driving a secondary question. One thing I will point out on this interface, if you look at the sentence associated with that data submittal form, it's something that a lot of people overlooked, including myself. A form has been established for timeline changes and may be submitted to the SCL using the reference number on this PDS once it's been saved and submitted. Let me tell you that language is being changed because the submittal of that form is required. And when I say that, the submittal of the form includes information that the interface doesn't, that is required for compliance. So I can tell you that language, don't get fooled by that language. Don't think, oh, I don't have to submit it. And I'm hoping we'll get something out from NERC on that says, hey, this is a known issue, we're correcting it, but submit the form. Do yourself a favor, because if you don't submit the form, what happens is I ask you to submit the form. And I send you an RFI or have a conversation with you, whatever the case may be. So be very aware of that issue. We wish we had caught it before, but like you folks, we're kind of caught in a crunch in getting this interface out there to a large degree. So we know that's an opportunity for you. Now remember, clicking Save as Draft, you can change things. If it's in draft form, I cannot see it. If you hit Save, your responses are finalized and you can't change your answers. Now, all three of those fields are populated using drop-down menus. The cold weather constraint, you've got two types. And depending on how you answer it, you could get a secondary question. And that may be for each one of these. Let's go to the next slide here and you'll see what I mean there. If you say it's a known constraint, if you say, hey, this is a known constraint, that secondary question comes up, select the associated situation. And if you go back in attachment 1, you'll see 5 or 6 bullets that are known. Well, those are listed. If you see that second picture, you can see the listing of those. Select the one that's appropriate for your situation as the known constraint. Now, naturally, the case by case is going to be different. It's going to be a little bit longer. I think there's 10, 11 different types, and there's subtypes under those. But understand, we want to capture that. That's another one of these tracking things. How many constraints do we have known? How many of them are wind turbine towers, wind turbine blades, solar frozen precipitation, whatever the case may be? Want to capture through a report. So please make sure you're looking at that known versus case by case. Again, I will tell you is important from our perspective, trying to get responses back to you as quickly as possible. I will tell you, I'm relatively sure that an entity initiated PDS, when you submit, the system will send you an email. I don't believe that's what we're considering as receipt of the PDS. And I think that's important because the process talks about receiving within so many days and then reviewing within so many days. We have been here at WAC sending individual emails back to folks that have been submitting that we have received these. So be cognizant of that because that's important from a timing perspective. It also may be indicative of need for more time. And this goes to, I expect, several more constraints before the 14th, and whether or not we can actively review every one of them in an effective manner, that remains to be seen depending upon what comes in. As you go through this, you'll get to another set of questions. If we'll go to the next slide. Those conditional questions, again, this one is that submittal. If you say no, nothing comes up. If you say yes, it's going to ask you for that ID. It's a free form text. Do your best to get the full reference in there. And the full reference is at the top of the already submitted one. And that's important so we can go back and look and see how we evaluated that constraint, what we did, what actions were taken. So be cognizant of that. Now there is, well, I don't have a picture of this because I didn't see it in the test site for some reason, but there's the ability to submit with data or submit with no data, something like that. I don't have the picture in front of me because it wasn't in my interface. Do not select submit with no data. If you submit with no data, what happens is it automatically goes to my completed tab within a line. It's a known issue. It's been out there. In this case, the known issue will cause problems because you don't have a valid constraint until the CEA says it's valid. And I hate to put it that way, but that's kind of how the standard was written and kind of how the thought process is. And so if it goes to completed, we may not know it's there. We've got some internal controls to go back and look at completed tab to see if there's anything out there. But at some point, there's going to be so many of these, it's going to be a little hard to find. So do yourself a favor and me a favor, don't hit that submit with no data. You need to submit the SEL form, so that should clue you in on you're submitting some data. Feedback on that spreadsheet, which we're going to get to here in just a second, I think is important. We're open to thoughts there. I know we bounced it off some entities prior to actually implementing that, but that was, I don't know, probably a year ago when it was drafted and put together and has been updated with the standard language that's been updated per the 321 process. But don't hesitate to provide feedback to me. That cold weather task force talked about, we may be able to change that form a little quicker than the text, so to speak, in the Align interface. A critical thing to understand: known constraints require some documentation, and the known constraints differ. If you look at those 6 different ones that are in attachment 1, 5 or 6 different ones, some of them say through analysis, some of them are kind of silent. But the idea that they're known doesn't automatically mean nothing needs, you don't provide supporting documentation, supporting thoughts. Now, some people are thinking differently at this point, and I can tell you that wouldn't, just submitting it that way without any information associated with it, there's no way for us to validate it. And FERC was very, very critical on the idea that NERC and the CEAs had to validate this information. So what does that data look like? Well, each one of them may be a little bit different. I would highly recommend discussions with the OEM, going back to see when development was happening on certain sites. Are there manuals that talk about certain activities? I know there's some manuals out there for solar that talk about the only way to get snow off is brush it off or a blower, and that's probably not conducive to real life. But we need to be able to capture some justification in those known constraints. Please don't believe that just because it's out there and called known that you don't need to support it. And that should vary, and that's one of the keys tomorrow. I know NAGF is talking about us on, and of course we're looking at that deeply within organizations across the ERO enterprise. What's available, what makes good sense, what can we do in terms of these known constraints. One of the reasons you need to think about that is every 36 calendar months, you have to review your constraints. So if you have a known constraint and you don't have documentation as to how you know it's a known constraint, what are you going to review in 36 months? You're simply not just going to check the box and say, no, nothing's available. You're going to do due diligence and evaluate whether or not that's valid or not. And I think that's important to understand. So you're establishing that baseline for future review. And I think you'll see more and more of that coming out through some other efforts by the ERO enterprise. We do have a practice guide that we're putting together. Actually, it's put together and it's going through the process of getting approved. The CCC will see it at some point. And it has some questions on every constraint, every known constraint, and every case-by-case constraint. Remember, practice guides are something that we as the CMAP staff use to evaluate compliance, use to evaluate things. So you'll get to see the insight associated with what we might expect. So I wish it had came out over the summer. It did not. It is coming down the path and something we'll announce and may have a discussion on that as well in the future. But once you get all these questions done, you do have to click on that data submittal form. I highly recommend you build yourself some internal controls on managing that data, managing that evidence within your own construct, however you want to do it. That form is blank when it comes out, but certainly if I was you, I'd be keeping up with what units it's applicable to, what NCR it may be applicable to, whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, whatever's in the SEL is what we'll be reviewing. And you can do multiple units on a form. If you're in coordinated oversight, you should be able to do multiple units in multiple jurisdictions as well. So we tried to make it as administrative friendly as we can based on the constraints. Let's go to that next slide and we'll see at least the interface for and it's pretty small, I know, but the opportunity that we have here is there's some basic information at the top, pretty much similar to most of the PDS evaluations that come through, or the entity-driven forms that are out there. We are trying to get this posted publicly. We'd like to get them all posted publicly. I know NERC staff is looking at that right now. Certainly, if they get to the point where they've gotten it ready for public, we'll be announcing that and getting that going. But if you look at it, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Registered entity. If you're in an MRE, put your name and your group number there. The NCR ID available to put in there. You could add additional NCR IDs. So note, you may submit it under NCR 1, but it may be applicable to NCR 1, 2, and 3. That's allowable. That's something that's allowed. The CEA and LRE, the lead region is, if you're in coordinated oversight, that's whoever your lead region is, and date of discovery for applicable constraint. Why is that important? Well, here in the future, you've got to do these constraints within a certain time frame of when you found them. Right now, you're under the construct you have 45 days to submit whatever you created prior to EOP-012-3 coming into play. In the future, you'll have, I believe it's within 45 days of declaring or understanding you need a constraint, you have to submit this. So that's important. Note, we've got some information here about supporting information from vendors. Outage denials could come into play. You never know. Force majeure, a variety of different things that could come into play as to why that declaration is being submitted. Why is that important? Well, corrective action plans, if something precludes you from implementing your corrective action plan, you may have to call a constraint. So kind of have an idea of what's precluding you, what's stopping you from doing that. For sure, the NCR's ID list is pretty self-explanatory there. You may be able to say all, as long as you've got them all up there and above. Generating units is important. Make sure that you capture all the generating units that it's applicable to, especially if you have a generator cold weather reliability event. It's going to be a little interesting because generator cold weather reliability events could affect 1 unit or 10 units for an entity. R6, the unit that had the event has to do a corrective action plan, may have to call out a constraint depending on what it is. This will allow you to kind of capture all that in one location. Justification for the circumstances, that's brief. You could have something longer and probably likely longer in something submitted in the SEL. Just make sure you tell your story. Make sure you've updated operating limitations. This is another thing why this is important. Notice that operating limitation question was not in that interface. This is required for compliance. So you saying you have or have not will lend itself to good compliance health, I guess you could say. Have you updated the plan? Lots of cases you may not have to update the plan, but in many cases you might. So it's just dependent upon what the constraint is, what it looks like, making sure that people are aware. This last column is just in case you have one of those sister units, or if you have to use requirement 8.4. And 8.4 talks about if you already have a unit that is under a generator cold weather constraint because of a generator cold weather reliability event, you may be able to call out another unit or similar unit or the same unit for that event. You may not have to create everything. You could come in here and do something pretty quick, pretty simple, and submit that to us. So just be aware that that probably won't be used very often, but it could be updated. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here's a example, and it is a brief example. Probably reflects more of me than I want to. It's Beavis Incorporated. For those of you who like Beavis, you may see some generating units associated with Beavis. Please don't hurt me. But this is what a completed one may look at. And when I completed it, I noticed I don't like 15-December-25. It matches, but that's something that we likely may change. It's really not a big deal, but ultimately that's a possibility. NCRs associated with these units, all of them turned out to be kind of the same. Here's what we have. They had this issue. This is what we wanted to do. Yes, operational limits. We've told people plans on site have occurred. This is the date that it occurred. Make sure you complete this form. Make sure you get it in the SEL, then submit that PDS to the region. Again, I want to emphasize that the PDS is left in draft state. We cannot take action. There's nothing we can do. We don't know it exists. So we need to know that. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Here, there's a couple things you need to make sure of. We talk about simply all. Just make sure the applicable NCRs are there make sure the applicable generating units for those NCRs are there as well. Think about your asset registration form for the names. If you're telling me Unit 1, but in the asset verification form it says Jackson Unit 1, there may not be a one-to-one comparison for me to do or for me to understand in the future here. So try to keep that consistent between that asset verification form. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if there are sampling techniques in an audit or something, you know, depending on how you call it here and how you call it other places, may dictate some questions and some answers that have to be made in the future. Pay attention to that embedded note. That one is important because that's that one that kind of covers 8.4. It may be everything the same, just you can refer to X and update the other fields as applicable, because you may have a new unit that is applicable to, you may have a new NCR that's applicable to. You still want to make sure you provide the operating limitations for those units as needed. If we do make changes to the form, we'll certainly make people aware of that. Again, we're trying to get those posted publicly. Let's go to the next slide. And I just want to reemphasize this. When you're going through those questions and you answer all those questions, you've got that choice: save draft, and close. Save draft, I'll never see it. Save, you can't change your answers. Now, understand, if you can't change your answers, that's a problem. I can reopen things. So if you go, oh, I really didn't want to do that, there may be a case where I can reopen those. I suggest saving as draft until you're ready to action. And that action box is on the PDS instance, not exactly on the questions instance or the interface. So be aware of that. That top half is the interface for the questions. That bottom half is the overall interface for PDS. So you have to submit, you have to say there's an action here and you action it. You can see that I've put many instances of, if it's in draft submit, draft state, I cannot see it. Make sure if you send us something, if you don't hear anything from us in a couple of days, send me an email, reach out to me to make sure, because if people are submitting with no data, again, I'm telling you not to do it. We'll get that in a note out to everybody, but if somebody does that, we may not see it at some point. If I've got 57, 58 constraints, and that 59th one was somebody's submitted with no data, you may not have a valid constraint on your hands. That could cause you an opportunity, could cause you an issue, and we don't want that. Now, a lot of discussion, and tomorrow we'll probably have more discussion about known constraints, about what's expected. I will just tell you, do your best to justify what that known constraint is. If you think about these, if the individual wind turbine towers issue, if you have that, pretty straightforward. They have to be manufactured prior to October 1st, 2029. That's happening today, right? I mean, that's going to happen until October 2nd, 2029. When did they do that? You know, when were they manufactured? Where are manufactured dates for towers kept? No one has told me yet. I'm waiting for someone to ask me so I can ask the industry. Certainly there's information associated with it out there. And of course, there's some questions in that practice guide that'll drive you that, but we have to see that. We know you're a wind plant. When were the towers manufactured? That's going to be important, because in the future, we're going to have to ask that question as we get closer to 2029. And that'll be after your 3-year review. That'll be up for your next 3-year review. And I think when we start looking at that, I think that's going to be the next thing here in a couple of years. We have to really look at is what happens with that known constraint. Just a second here. Someone's pinging me for something and I got to tell them to quit. I thought I had that off. If we go to the next set of constraints, you'll see, sorry, the boss asks you to do something, you got to do it real quick. The boss in this case, if Deb's on, is my wife, so forgive me. Yeah, go to the next one. It has multiple bullets, sub-bullets. The application of freeze protection measures. That one is the one that there's a lot of discussion about. Replacing existing wind turbine blades with new blades solely for the purpose of adding de-icing. Well, if you don't have de-icing or ice minimizing capabilities, that's one thing. Ask the OEM what's available. Was there anything available? If not, you don't have them. You would have to replace them. They're likely at some point to try to sell you something, correct? I mean, that makes good sense from a business sense that ultimately they'll have wind turbine blades that have de-icing or ice minimizing capabilities more readily available. Right now, they may not capture that. Solar panels, what does that look like? Is there anything from your manufacturer that says what to do or what not to do about frozen precipitation? Can you tilt your solar panels in some case to minimize it? Maybe. Heat trace on solar panels, probably not advised. May be available in some cases, don't know, but capture that from that OEM. Inlet air filters, kind of the same thought process. I know there's a particular unit type out there. I believe it's the LMS 1000 that has a humidity temperature curve that icing can occur above freezing. And it's a little interesting in that respect, but capturing some of those thought processes, what prevents you from applying heat upstream? There are lots of different opportunities there. There are companies that have addressed that. In our assurance visits, we've actually talked with people who have introduced a heat sled in front of that air inlet. Part of it was because of another upgrade that was going on in their system, and they thought they could get additional runtime in cooler weather with adding that. So that made it beneficial for them to do so. Heat tracing or other de-icing for wind turbine blades through analysis. Again, that through analysis means you've looked at it, you've evaluated it. Whatever you do, I mentioned it at the beginning, 30% of the constraints that we have received somewhere in the neighborhood have said, I can't do this because of cost. Don't do that. I will tell you that will be an invalid constraint if you use cost as the reasoning for failure to, or any preclusion to include a freeze protection measure. Perhaps they weren't listening. Perhaps they didn't fully explain what the idea was. Cost certainly is one of your concerns, but you need to have some other supporting documentation as to why it's not applicable. If you use cost again, you will come up with an invalid constraint. Hopefully that's given you a pretty good broad overview of what to expect. I think that was my last slide, but we can go to the next slide there. I know that the ERO Enterprise is using this slide deck, adjusting it a little bit, actually putting in slides, perhaps about the submitting with no data. They're considering a podcast on it. We'll see what happens there. But again, I want to make myself as available as I can. If you have questions about what you should do, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know time is limited in terms of submitting those, but I would certainly appreciate submittal early with questions and submittal late with questions also. And I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Curtis. We've had David Lemons and Hannah Kreitz raise their hands. So Megan, can you unmute David, please?
Oh, no, don't do that.
Go ahead,
Hey,
David.
David.
Hello, thank you, Curtis. I want to go back to your comments about the replacing wind turbine blades
Yeah.
and needing to ask the OEM. I'm going to say under the PRC efforts that have been going on at NERC, generator owners have been taking some heat for not knowing specific information about their facilities. For a blade turbine owner, I think they probably know whether there's heat built into that blade or not. So what are we expecting the OEM to tell us that the generator owner can't tell us by stating they did not install heated blades on their turbines and they have no plans to replace blades at this time? What do we need from the OEM to support that?
Yeah, and I think the opportunity there is it available? Was it available? Did you actually do it upon order? That's kind of that thought process. And I know this is one of the questions you have for tomorrow as well. So I'm going off script because we as the ERO Enterprise have fully explored everything, David. But the idea that you own it and you know, how do you know? And that could be through an OEM manual. It could be through emails to the OEM. It could be, hey, this is what the OEM put out on this type of equipment when we purchased it. Notice there's nothing in there about de-icing or ice minimizing capabilities. Capturing that kind of information is what we're trying to do here, is trying to establish that floor on what to look forward to in the future. I think it'll be the same 3 years from now, right? Most of these OEMs are not going to go back and retrofit something from 10 years ago. I say that there could be some, but I don't think they're going to come back and try to sell you 420 wind turbine blades to replace place out there. They might, but I don't think you're going to buy them.
Well, I guess I appreciate saying maybe provide the OEM's manual from the original.
Yeah.
I guess I'm questioning why you can't just accept my statement that it doesn't have it. That's what we accept on pretty much everything else, is my attestation that something is the case. So
Well, we actually don't just accept attestations in general. We generally want corroborating information. And I think with this, because it's so touchy in terms of what FERC required, that is why we're trying to validate it. I own a Ford. Okay, great. What capabilities were on that Ford when you purchased it? What does that look like? What did the OEM say it was available? I think that's what we're trying to get to, David.
okay, thank you for the explanation.
Yes, sir.
Let's go ahead and give Stephanie the floor.
And I can't hear Stephanie if
Stephanie,
she's talking.
you came off mute, but you might be double muted.
I think just go back to David while she's getting that opportunity. You know, FERC requires us to validate, and validation requires a certain amount of information. Again, to that point, attestations are allowed out there, but we always search for that corroborating information. And in this case, we feel like you can get some pretty easy information from your OEM if you don't already have it. I know we were talking with somebody and they actually are sending me their OEM manual for their solar panels. And I think that's fantastic because we're not necessarily aware of what's out there. Were you able to get unmuted?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. We
good.
had a constraint and I filed it, and then our SME came back and had done some further reviewing and found another one. Should I add that to the same spreadsheet, or should that be a separate submittal?
Have you already submitted it to me?
Yes.
You have. Has it already been approved?
I don't think so.
valid? Well, let's go offline because I don't have any out there unless you're with a particular company that I've been speaking with. I've only got 6 that are out there that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'll go back out there, and then if I don't have it submitted, I can just redo that. And if I do, I can contact you offline.
Yeah, please do. It may be one of those cases, again, great example. It may be in draft form and I can't see it. And if it's not actioned by you, I'll never know.
Okay. I did get an email stating that it had gone through, so.
Was it today?
Oh, no, I think this was Monday.
Monday.
So I'll go in and look.
I'm gonna write your name down because I don't see anything off the top of my head. I've been traveling this week, but I know I was at an airport yesterday looking at this stuff. I only had 6, and it was one particular company.
All right, we'll get back with you offline, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Sheila and then Terry.
Hi there, Ashley here. What is, maybe I missed it there, the date of discovery for the constraint? Are we using October 1, November 15th, November 14th? What?
In the cases EOP-012-2, just put what your original date was when you discovered it in that case, because under -2, remember those constraints you kept locally. We didn't have any idea what they were unless we did through an audit or through that cold weather data collection. So we know that it's not going to be meeting the requirements of -3 only because you developed those constraints under -2 and are now applying them to -3, and that just requires that submittal. So if you discovered it last March, but March of 24, whatever, March 1st.
Well, we've always known that there's icing on wind turbine. So you're talking the first cold weather reliability event?
Yeah, I would put when you had when you suffered the event would be fine if that's what you want to declare as your constraint. Yep, the date of your constraint understanding under -2.
Okay, thank you very
Now,
much.
no, you may have multiples, right? Here again, cold weather fronts come through. They may affect 1 or 10 units. They may affect 1 unit one day and 3 units the next. So, and the way we allow constraints, you can submit one constraint for those, the main unit and their sister units at the same time, if you so declare.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Terry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Curtis, could you clarify what is and is not a preemptive constraint submission? If I'm in a warm climate, it might or might not snow. So my understanding would be you wait until there's actual snow that causes an event, and then you submit the constraint. Is that correct?
That is the general thought process at this point. And the reason why is twofold. The preemptive, it may never occur, right? It may never occur. It's susceptible to it for sure. But if you call it out under R3 and go down that process, when it does occur, the standard language requires you to go through R6. You have to go through and resubmit everything associated with that constraint and some additional information. You have to develop that cap to do those sort of things because you can't take advantage of, I think it's 8.4. If you go to 8.4 in the standard, it's discussing the idea that if you have an event and you've already called out a generator or cold weather constraint, which this could play into Stephanie's thoughts as well. If you already have declared a constraint based on a generator cold weather reliability event, you have another event on the same or similar unit, you can use the same constraint that you did for the first one, but you have to notice us and you have to provide information. And that's what that form allows that to occur. You can say, hey, look at this one. This is just an additional unit this occurred for. It also may help you in the future in terms of reviewing constraints in that respect. But if you go down that R3 path, which we're advising you not to, I think we may be firmer on that. Don't do it, because R3 is really about situations like if you have a design temperature of -20, but your ECWT is -25, you're likely never get to be able to get to that ECWT. And so that is a kind of one of those valid R3 constraints, or in the future R2 as far as that goes. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, let's go ahead and unmute Michael.
Hi, Mike Jenkins, Duke Energy. Kind of responding to your response to that last question. Whether you have a preemptive or not, if you have an event, it doesn't get you out of like R6. You're still going to be forced to produce all the administrative work for the other standards that prompts you to move into the corrective action process. I don't really. We may get some, I guess, administrative savings with R8, but you're still having to fill out that form that you were showing us, though. Still, wouldn't you? Whether you're got an existing one or not, I'm kind of confused on how having the. I can see the advantages of having a pre-approved constraint that you can add stations to, but if you're still using like the same form and the same submission process, there's no, I guess, advantage in like administrative burden.
Well, actually, the 8.4, if you do have an event, if you have R3 and you have an event and it's very specific to whatever that event may be, you will have to do R6, no doubt. It's how you declare under R3 what that really is important in many respects, and capturing that information, because again, we want to track where the constraints are and where they're validated through, which environment they're validated through. And so that's important to understand that distinction. The possibility that it could occur, that's nothing we want to deal with necessarily in terms of that documentation. We want to understand what units definitely have the inability to operate to their ECWT. And I would say in normal operations, i.e., and when I say normal operations, you're not always going to have icing, you're not always going to have snow. You're going to have extreme cold weather. Whether or not you can operate to your extreme cold weather temperature, you get that opportunity to declare under R3 for sure in those cases. And then you have to look at what applies in R6. I know there's some more talk about that, and I can tell you it's very convoluted in some respects. I know the standard drafting team put together a flow chart in the back of the TR, if I recall, and it kind of captured that thought process. Here are some things that have to happen. And so we're trying to keep true to that with the process. And I wish, repeats on generated cold weather reliability events, you do have to submit some information for sure, no doubt about it, but you have to submit less if you've already declared it under that R6 and you have another one, and you actually can utilize it for other units in similar conditions. So there's still some information that you have to fill out. I wish there was a better way to do it, but there's not, according to the language. I know there's going to be some questions out there, so we'll trust me. Behind the scenes, probably some of that pinging was cold weather task force folks asking me a question, and it's like, stop, you got time for this. But
Thank you so much, Curtis. Thank you everyone for your participation. We did get a couple virtual questions that we'll forward on to you, Curtis, and thank you everyone for being here today.
And Stephanie, I'll reach out to you. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.